So the Edmonton Oilers, fresh from an appearance in the Stanley Cup Final, which I was very happy for because I love Connor McDavid and I love a lot of their pieces. But not only does he speak about the Oilers, but he speaks about the Rangers. So joining us here on the Via Global, the satellite network presented by StreamYard, Nick Zararis joining us here up on the show. So let's start with what we have gotten with the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, this was kind of a magical season to say for what they've done because I absolutely love their head coach in Knoblauch. I think he's definitely figured this out and refined this organization. So recapping what this season was, because to be honest, I didn't trust their goaltending. I thought that was going to be a challenge moving into this thing. But they've defied the odds. So when you think about it, with the confidence level they're going into this now up-and-coming season, I mean, it's pretty strong to say that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think your big concern, if you're an Oilers fan right now, is not having a letdown because you had such a good season. Everybody loves your offseason, too. The decisions you've made, bringing in Skinner, bringing in Arvidsson, trading for Matthew Savoie. Everybody's kind of head over heels with all the decisions over the last 2 weeks. They do have some stuff to figure out. They're still over the salary cap right now, whether or not Evander Kane will be on the team next year, whether or not Cody Ceci, Brett Kulak. They're going to have to make at least one more, if not two more roster decisions to get cap compliant by the start of next season. But on paper, yeah, this is easily going to be the most talented team of the McDavid era. The goaltending questions, I still think are valid. You know, remember Jack Campbell did start the year as their starter last year, and he was so bad that he had to go down to the AHL, and Skinner eventually worked it out. Then you remember, of course, he got pulled for games 4 and 5 of the second round series against Vancouver, where they went to Calvin Pickard for 2 games and then went back to Skinner. And then after that, Skinner was fine. The big question is, can you stay healthy? Because that's been an issue for them at points over the last few years. And just getting to the playoffs in one piece. You know, the Oilers, for a lot of the last few years, they've gotten to a first or a second. They've gotten through the first round against the Kings 3 years in a row now. But you think about that series against Colorado 2 years ago, extremely injured, not really. You weren't going to beat a Colorado team that already kind of had the team of destiny look. Last year, you ran into a wall against Vegas. You were pretty dinged up. This year, they stayed pretty healthy. You know, Evander Kane missed 5 games. They definitely missed guys at various points for a game or two. Adam Henrique only played 15 of the 25 playoff games, but they have more than enough talent. And unfortunately in hockey, having talent isn't necessarily the precursor. You know, good teams lose in the playoffs. It's just kind of the nature. You look at that Vegas-Dallas first-round series from this past season where Vegas very well could have won that, and I wouldn't have been surprised if Vegas was playing Edmonton in the conference final.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting, you know, with how everything played out. But, you know, what's funny, though, another case that you could also make, too, was the sweep that they had basically been given against the Winnipeg Jets. That was another one that I thought was a big-time pill to swallow. And you could tell from Connor McDavid just how frustrating that is because he wants to get there. He wants to win. And, you know, and it's one of those things. So thinking of Connor McDavid, because I was very happy that he made it into the Stanley Cup Final. I really was, because he's such a polarizing player. And you listen, when you get a polarizing player like that, who's just that damn good at his position, and let alone just that damn good on the ice, I mean, you're hoping he gets to the big stage. Now my next wish, hopefully in baseball, that I get to see Mike Trout in the World Series, because at that point, we finally got what we wanted, all as sports fans, for loving it and watching it as much as we do. But I felt like, and a lot of people have kind of gone back and forth with the Conn Smythe Trophy, and here's my defense for Connor McDavid. You were never going to get another player who's just that polarizing and yet had a great postseason all the way around. I understand that, like, you don't want to give it to a guy who's on a losing team. I get that. But still, out of respect for him, he's going to win one eventually. That is one trophy in his trophy case he has yet to win. So your thoughts on him getting the Conn Smythe Trophy? Because to be honest, I wasn't really mad at it at all. I felt like you're getting the best player in overall in the Stanley Cup playoffs that I felt was very deserving of a trophy like this.
Absolutely agree with you in that respect of it's for the entire playoffs. If it was just the finals MVP, sure, you could make an argument for guys on Florida based on the criteria of the award. And that doesn't mean a whole lot. NHL awards aren't always voted on by the letter of the law. Like last year, Erik Karlsson won the Norris, even though the definition is the best all-around defenseman, and he was like a -28. So voting on the awards is always subjective. The criteria to be a panelist to vote on the award. But McDavid was undoubtedly the best player in the playoffs. When you're breaking records where the only people ahead of you are Gretzky and Lemieux, you had a special postseason. And he was genuinely great in the Vancouver series. He was really good in the Dallas series. You would have liked more from him in the final itself, but he had the 2 4-point games and got them to a game 6 and a game 7. So I understand from the perspective that you probably want to give the award to someone on a winning team. But who on Florida was more deserving? That's really the issue there, is that Florida, you would have probably said Bobrovsky, but they got shelled in those 2 games, and that kind of left a bad taste in people's mouth. And then nobody else on Florida really put up any crazy counting stats. Nobody had 11 points in 7 games, 15 points in 7 games. So I think it probably was a case of those guys kind of splitting the vote from each other, and McDavid kind of a slam dunk, in all honesty. As soon as they got to a game 7, I thought it was a guarantee he was going to win the award. I mean, that was the conversation going into game 6, let alone game 7, that if they just got there, I think he had done enough. And he did. Obviously, he wanted to win the cup a lot more. Winning that individual trophy is nice, but a guy like that, he can win the individual awards. It's not about that at this point. He's 9 years in. He's only been to the playoffs 5 of the 9 years. They've only been past the second round twice in those 9 years. It's really hard to get there.
Yeah, I mean, here's the funny thing is that, like, even Tyler Seguin said it best with the Dallas Stars. It is a damn hard trophy to really hoist up, because that's all of the weight from just you're getting your ass kicked on a daily basis, getting checked, getting pushed, like all those things. But I like I said, I just think the competitive nature, it felt like it was right. I made a comment, and I'd like your thought on this, because I felt like this Oilers team, it felt a lot like the Oilers from the 80s, but the difference was we had no Grant Furr in this roster. I felt like that was the difference maker. You know what I mean? Can you elaborate on that? I mean, I just felt like that was the kind of Oilers team I got from, this team this year.
Energy-wise, style-wise, tempo, skill, incredible amounts of skill. Any team that has 2 of the 5 best players in the world like Edmonton does, it's going to jump off the screen, even if you're a casual hockey fan. I more than one occasion during the playoffs hanging out with my friends and just throwing on the Oilers. And every now and then they're just looking up and like, oh, he does. Yeah, he does that like every play. Every single time McDavid's out there, he looks that much better than everybody else. But I would say I don't think Skinner was the problem. I do think he could have been better at points. If he's a little bit better in maybe game 1 or game 2, that series has a very different complexion. But as far as why they didn't win, overall, I would say the defense is probably more of a culprit than Skinner himself. Of course, if you have a borderline Hall of Famer like Grant Fuhr or somebody like a Bobrovsky or Shesterkin, that always helps. You always want to have as much talent as possible. But I didn't feel like Skinner really failed them in that series in a way that he almost did in the Vancouver series. He played really well in the Dallas series and pretty much from game 4, 5, and 6. He was great in that series. Game 1, he wasn't great against Florida, but that wasn't really that first goal he concedes is tough, but you need to score. That's really the reason I won't blame Skinner that much for the final is they only had 1 goal through the first 2 games. And then you go into game 3, you work your way back into the game. You're down, I think 4-1. They get it to 4-3. They had plenty of chances. I don't think Skinner is the big culprit. If I had to point at somebody, I would say you probably needed more from Nurse and Cece, but you got to a game 7, you lost by 1 goal. You had a chance. There's been more than one time where I've blinked and I've seen that look where McDavid had the puck one-on-one with Bobrovsky. And I think it was Brandon Montour jammed his stick and he just couldn't get anything on it. The net was open. It happens. This is a hard sport.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. And it's very competitive to, at the very least, because again, like I said, when you go into the Stanley Cup playoffs, it is a totally different beast that you're dealing with because there are many, many teams out there. I felt like it was very exciting this year because we got a lot more teams and we're very competitive. And I felt like we're the right fits. So fast forwarding into now this offseason when you talked about offense. So here we go. Jeff Skinner and now Victor Arvidsson. So they bring these guys in. I felt like Edmonton is kind of doing this thing with what Florida did this trade deadline. They've added offense. They've added much needed offense that I felt like they were missing from last year's Cup appearance. Do you feel like now adding in this offense, this kind of now meshes in what they kind of were missing in the most pivotal point, in the Cup final?
I think stylistically, yes. I think that was more of the issue than not having the type of talent, because obviously you get to a Stanley Cup final, you're a talented team, but someone like Arvidsson, who's got 50 to 60 point potential, doesn't need to be on your power play to still put up good stats, who forechecks well, who cycles well. And then you had Skinner, who's got 6 30-goal seasons, who not the most, we can be honest, Skinner's a one-dimensional player. He's going to skate in a straight line and he's going to put the puck on the net. That in a supporting role, whether it's on your second or third line, he's not going to get on your first power play. Those are quality pieces. And the most important thing, they weren't expensive and they didn't have to give either guy a ton of term. Skinner's 1 year, Arvidsson's 2. That was the most important thing for the Oilers in free agency, was finding quality depth. They had to subtract. They did have to trade Ryan McLeod. They got a nice piece in return for him in Savoie, who may or may not be an NHL player this year. That's debatable, but they've made a conscious decision that we can get more skilled. We can get a little bit more talented. And the reason I like Arvidsson slightly more than Skinner as far as fit is the forecheck and the cycle. That was something that Edmonton really struggled with at times in that final against Florida, because when Florida got going in that series, they were reducing those games to ugly rock fights, 20, 25 shots on goal each team per game, when these teams are usually high 30s, low 40s in today's NHL. So when there's fewer chances and you have to grind it out for offense, it's a lot harder to do that when you're used to playing the way Edmonton does, where it's up and down, defense to offense quickly. Now you add someone like Arvidsson, who's really good on the cycle, who's good at forechecking, and has a little bit of offense to his game. I do think he's probably a slightly better fit there for that spot than, say, a Vander Kane or maybe Nugent Hopkins or Warren Foegele.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what hopefully that the Oilers, what they do this next up and coming season, where they picked up off at. Because I just look at this whole Western Conference, it is very competitive. I mean, Nashville's going all in. Dallas, is big on defense, especially with just their identity. But there are other teams like Vancouver ended up grabbing, a couple really good quality players. But it'll be interesting to see what next year really just looks like for them. And I think this is still a playoff team, but now the competition is just getting heated more and more as I keep seeing the Western Conference. So shifting now to the New York Rangers, and a side note, family members of mine living in New York and Long Island, and we've seen from one of your posts up in Stony Brook News, love Stony Brook, absolutely love it. So the Rangers, I'm not disappointed this season. I felt like this team really clicked on a lot of cylinders, but it is hard when the fact that you've got the President's Trophy on your shoulders and you're trying to do with what the Chicago Blackhawks did in the past. But I felt like the competition against Florida was clear. They had more depth. They were the team that was hungry and aggressive. So when you look at what the Rangers season was this year, I can't be disappointed. I think they definitely turned a lot of heads. This was a team that I felt like really kind of got all in, but it just, it kind of got all the way to the end, and then that was the ending result.
It's a hard one because, like you said, the Rangers very clearly were a good team in the regular season, but I think the Rangers' issue this year, like it's been a number of times over the last 10 to 15 years, is their roster is really built well for the regular season. You can win in the regular season with elite goaltending and special teams. The Rangers have consistently run into this issue, whether it was with Henrik Lundqvist or over the last 3 years, where they've eventually gotten to a playoff series where they need one of their star players to be the best guy on the ice. And it's really hard to win when that's a goalie. You think about who the Rangers have come up short against in the last few years. This past year against Florida, Panarin, Zibanejad, Kreider, you're going to take Barkov, Kachuk, Verhaeghe, whichever third Florida forward you prefer. 2 years ago against the Devils, Jack Hughes had 100 points, was a Hart Trophy finalist 2 years ago. You would probably take Hughes, Heischer, and then probably Bratt over Zibanejad, Trocheck, and Kreider or Panarin. And then 3 years ago against the Tampa team that lost to Colorado, same deal. You're going to take Stamkos, Kucherov, Point over the Rangers guys. And that's not a knock, but that's been the Rangers' issue the last handful of seasons is they're good and the bar in the conference final and the cup final is great. I don't know if the Rangers would have fared particularly well against Edmonton. I do think the Rangers know the limitations of their roster, and it's why they've tried to orient the team around goaltending and defense, because they know they don't have forwards who are particularly adept at 5-on-5, working the cycle, and kind of playing the ugly game that Florida did so well this year.
Yeah, it was interesting. And the one thing that I looked at, and Peter Laviolette came in, and this was my honest response before the season started, was I felt like I wasn't sure how this Ranger team was going to come off of knowing that they fired Gerard Gallant, who I know is a hyper-aggressive type of offensive guy, but the thing that really knocks him the most is this puck and go stuff. But then where's my defense? That's the thing that I kind of get scared of the most. I've seen this with Vegas. I've seen this now with the Rangers. And again, it didn't really pan out well. Yes, you got an Eastern Conference appearance out of it, but then it was like against the Devils, they looked so marginalized. So in comes Peter Laviolette. And I felt like this team was going to take a step back from what they had, but yet he proved me wrong this year. So when you look at how Peter Laviolette really managed this group, was there did you spot this identity change? And how would you best describe it, how Peter Laviolette really took this team versus from what we got from Gerard Gallant?
The defense was a lot better at transitioning to offense quickly. And that ultimately, ironically, was their undoing against Florida, is that Florida was just better. That Florida's forecheck was just that much better than the Rangers' ability to break out. 2 years ago, the season they lost to the Devils in the first round, they really did not take that regular season seriously. They knew they were going to be a playoff team. The effort wasn't very consistent. The forecheck and the cycle were not very consistent. The 5-on-5 play in general was pretty bleh most of the year. They waited around till the deadline. They added Tarasenko. They added Kane. Neither of those guys particularly gelled well with the guys that were already here. They moved a lot around to accommodate both Kane and Tarasenko, and it never really looked right. And they got to that series against the Devils, who were faster, and the Devils just outworked them. They won loose pucks. They cycled them into oblivion, and the Devils just won foot races. Under Laviolette in the regular season, they really did a nice job of keeping their game simple. And most importantly, the biggest difference is that they had one of the best lines in hockey this year. Panarin, Lafreniere, and Trocheck were outstanding in the regular season. Panarin took almost twice as many shots this past season as he did the year before, and that unlocked so much more for Trocheck and Lafreniere. Trocheck took, I think, about 100 shots more than he did the season before. Lafreniere about 100 shots more than the season before. When you have a line that is driving possession that strongly, everything else can flow off of it. There's been a struggle here for a few years of, is that the first line, or is whoever Kreider, Zibanejad, and whoever the right wing is the first line? They answered the question this year. Panarin, 49 goals, 120 points, was fourth in the Hart Trophy voting. They were right there. They really had a line that was able to drive the boat. Their third line wasn't very good counting stats-wise, but they could control play, slow the game down, and cycle. The Rangers just needed a little diversification. They had all that skill on the team 2 years ago. They Kane, Tarasenko, Zibanejad, Kreider, Trocheck, Panarin. It didn't really work because all of those guys were kind of doing the same thing. This past year, a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more focus on the fundamentals, cycling the puck, working for offense, as opposed to just asking your star players to make plays.
Yeah, and like I said, I just think that all it had to take was moving a needle to really kind of make this team mesh and work, because I know they've got the offense. And I felt like, yeah, I agree with you. I felt like the defense looked a lot better. I think you got the best look of Igor Shesterkin that we've seen at netminder. And I just think if he capitalizes next season with the season he had, I think you could definitely make a case that the Rangers are definitely going to be a problem in the Eastern Conference for the next couple of years. Now, the interesting news, though, that has been surrounded right now is Jacob Trouba. I think it's an interesting one. What's your thoughts on the latest with, this potential trade rumor here?
So it's very funny you bring this up. We recorded Liberty Blue about 2 hours ago, and we don't know because there are two very conflicting narratives as to what happened. So the original report was the Rangers, Drury and Trouba had a meeting Wednesday or Thursday of the week going into the draft. They had a meeting, they sat down, Drury asked for the list. His list wasn't due until July 1st, but they sat down, Drury and them had a meeting. There was an article in the New York Post about Trouba was caught off guard. He was surprised, but it was moving towards the Rangers were going to attempt to trade him. Saturday of the draft, it's reported by Larry Brooks, Elliot Friedman, and Emily Kaplan that the Detroit Red Wings are the landing spot and that those two sides are working towards the trade. We don't hear anything the end of Saturday. We don't hear anything Sunday. Then Monday, Larry Brooks writes an article that basically retracts everything that's been said over the previous 72 hours. The Rangers never told Trouba he was going to be traded. There was never a trade on the table with Detroit. And Trouba might not go to a team even if they're not on his no-trade list because he doesn't want to leave his family. So either somebody was entirely wrong from the get-go or there's, public relations shenanigans going on. I'm more inclined to believe it's PR shenanigans going on because why would you ask the guy for his list if he was never going to get traded? Why would you ask for his list early like they did either Thursday or Friday, the week of the draft, if you weren't going to try and trade him before Monday before free agency? Again, we don't know, so I can't speak authoritatively, definitively, but based on what's been reported and subsequently reported, it's not all adding up. I think Trouba, more than anything, is a cap casualty. That was the argument for the Rangers trying to move him, is that he makes $8 million and he's the third defenseman on the right side on the depth chart right now. And the Rangers wanted to be players in free agency. They were linked to Kane, to Stamkos, to Marchessault, and they weren't going to be able to do that unless they traded Trouba.
Yeah, and that's the one thing too. And I've even talked about this. I'll be talking more about this on Thursday's show because again, there are teams that I've seen in the offseason that there are aggressive teams who have the cap that they're able to get aggressive in the offseason. But then there are some that are just so cap stretched thin that it's kind of hard to really, acquire more pieces when you know that you've got contracts involved. Now, I think the interesting thing is, I'd like your thought on this before letting you go, but this offseason, man, I mean, a $1.3 billion spending this year, I think is incredible. And at the same time, you watch teams that that are going to be, they're changing the narrative of what they are from the past season, maybe in the seasons before, and then what they're going to outlook into next season. And then there's some of those teams that I think could take the step back because it's either the cap situation or they either didn't end up addressing a lot of players. And sorry, Anaheim Ducks, but in the end, there's going to be a lot of different changes in narratives. But then you've got the new cap space that's going to be coming in the next year. I mean, this is some new money that's starting to come in here. And how do you think that the financial situations will shape for the league?
That's the biggest thing is we've been in essentially a flat cap environment for 5 years now. The cap was $81.5 million for 2019, 2020, and that was 4 years ago. You look at where the NBA has gone, where the NFL has gone, where the luxury tax ceiling in baseball is, those have grown exponentially in the last handful of years. And I remember I wrote something in the fall of 2019 that as soon as the new TV deal kicks in, every team should have something in the ballpark of an additional, I think it was like 300 something million in revenue once you kicked it all out over the extended life. And that's how it's calculated. The salary cap's calculated based off of revenue. And because that new TV money couldn't be tapped into because the players were paying off escrow the last 3.5 seasons, that money was just kind of just going into the owners' pockets for the season and the postseason where there were no fans or limited fans in the buildings. So with that in mind, I think the NHL is about, I think it was 8 years ago, was the Durant to the Warriors summer. That was the summer everyone went crazy in the NBA, where every team got $25 million against the cap. Hockey got a small version of that. 5 million is not 25 million, but relatively speaking, where the NBA salary cap was then and the NHL salary cap is now, it's about the same thing. And the other point I'll add on to that, free agency is usually the next general manager's problem. And that's why you see these contracts that get handed out. That the Chandler Stevenson contract really doesn't look good under the light. The Brady Shea contract probably doesn't look pretty good a few years from now. But free agency is useful to plug holes. You're never going to be able to build a team in free agency, but you need a third line wing. You need a third defenseman. There you can be successful. But I think Nashville is going to very quickly realize they needed more than just 3 guys. But they're not trying to win the Stanley Cup. They're just trying to make the playoffs and be competitive. So everybody's kind of got different aspirations, and you got to put the context of that behind the moves.
I actually like that. I'm glad that I'm keeping a clip of that, because I think that's very educational for at least for our audience here, especially when we're understanding the cap situations and, of course, contract reasons. Because what's funny is I've always said, could you imagine if hockey had baseball salary cap that has no cap at all? And I mean, good God, all these hockey players would be blessed. They wouldn't have to spend like an arm and a leg to get goalie gear, and because hockey equipment's expensive. So I'm like, so I could only imagine what NHL's cap situation would be like if, unlike all these other 3 major sports cap situations would be like. I think they'd be in heaven by now. But, again, everybody's different. And sometimes when you look at general managers, you look at how aggressive do they get? Are they smart when it comes to a lot of these things? Because, again, if I had somebody that was smart that knew the cap salary, the salary cap situation, and we got quality players, hell, I would sign that guy up as my own personal accountant if I really wanted to. So, but Nick, appreciate you jumping on by, man. Great stuff up on the show. I'm glad we got a clip of it. Where can people find you to really kind of fuel up for the Edmonton Oilers, man, when you're getting quality content like that?
My Twitter handle is just my name, Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis. Same thing on Instagram, and then on TikTok, it's Nick Zararis Sports. Mostly hockey stuff, but occasionally foray out there into football and baseball as well.
Well, there you go, folks. Definitely tune in on him, man. Great stuff. Appreciate you jumping on by, Nick. Enjoy the rest of the week, man, and we shall see if there's any more surprises that we got here up in free agency. Take care, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.